You're listening to Ember Weekend. I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson. And we're here with Mike North. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, it's really great. I'm pretty stoked to have you. This interview came about kind of randomly from just a tweet you shouted out at us saying, "Hey, I would interview with you," and that was super cool. I'm so glad that we were able to pull this all together.
Yeah, I'm glad I could jump on.
Cool. So, could you tell us a little about yourself? I know you're principal engineer at Yahoo. Anything else you'd like to tell the listeners?
Yeah. So I was a big part of adopting Ember at Yahoo and sort of trying to displace YUI as the framework of choice as we move towards single page apps. So I deal with our ad platform, which is called Yahoo Ad Manager Plus, and we have 14 other Ember apps in production that all share a bunch of add-ons. We sort of have our own little ecosystem.
Oh, wow. That is awesome. I did not realize that it was quite so pervasive. I thought that this was still kind of like there was the ad section and then maybe like a couple of main apps, but 14 apps, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's really thriving at Yahoo. We have 70 Ember developers now. We recently hired Steph Penner, so he's on staff, kind of making sure all of the build tools are running smoothly and helping us with the trickier problems.
Yeah, cool. I saw his Marvin came with him across. I saw the tweet storm of him and Marvin.
We bird-sat Marvin. He's awesome.
So were you using Ember before Ember CLI and everything was out, or are you in the process of upgrading a lot of these apps now that you have Stephen Penner right there, to kind of pick his brain?
So we've been closely working with the core team since we first started using Ember, which was back in the AppKit days. A lot of the apps are upgraded to Ember CLI. We have a few that are on the current release. One of my goals in the next couple months is to get everything on release or even a few on Canary, or at least capable of working on Canary, so that we can help the community by detecting some of these more complex use cases breaking.
You could be the canary.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Cool. So I know you're a big proponent of web components and maybe even sharing things across other ecosystems that aren't Ember necessarily. So how do you envision web components, how are you incorporating web components into Yahoo's platform?
Right. So like I said, with 15 Ember apps, they're often addressing some of the same problems. They all, have graphs and tables and select components and things that are sort of lacking that a lot of large data-driven applications need. So we certainly share Ember components amongst these 15 apps. We're also starting to move towards trying to share across frameworks, and that story is not as clear and it's certainly not as clean. But there are some apps written in React that want to borrow from Ember, and we're trying to come up with a good pattern for using that. Very cool.
Very cool.
So what are some of the hurdles you're running into? I know there's a lot of kind of unknowns in the web component world, like Shadow DOM and things.
Yeah, encapsulation's a big concern. So our theming is built on top of Bootstrap, and therefore a lot of the components we build, or at least a lot of the things we built initially, were very Bootstrap oriented. And then, of course, that's sort of an extra opinion that's injected into the way this thing is structured and the way the style is structured. So when it comes to making it more generic and yet still work with this theme, that's been a big struggle for us from the component standpoint.
Right, because you could have two components with two different versions of Bootstrap or something.
Yes, and especially when we start thinking about open sourcing components, de-bootstrapifying is really painful. You sort of end up having a couple different layers of shims that you can opt into based on what you need. The add-on story getting better with Ember CLI becoming the new way of doing things, that addressed a lot of the pain points involving distributing things across apps. We had our own internal sort of equivalent, much less sophisticated, much less a lot more rough around the edges. So we're glad for standardization there and add-ons.
Yeah, the add-on story seemed to be like the biggest single win in Ember CLI as a whole, in my opinion. Just being able to share and do all that sort of thing, it makes a lot of sense that you all would. I know I want to say it was Heroku also had kind of built their own system, so there's a lot of ad hoc solutions in the space. So it's been kind of nice to see that unify.
Yep.
Did you guys influence the add-on story itself? So
Sure. Yeah, we've influenced the add-on story sort of at its advent, right? So we probably were not the only ones to come up with the idea, but we were using this idea of having two separate trees, one that's brought into the app, one that exists, you know, in its own namespace, and so we see that coming through with Ember add-ons. And since then, I think there's been a lot of emphasis on trying to test across multiple versions of the framework. So we have some apps that are on versions as old as 1.8.1, some that are, trying to deploy with 2.0 pretty soon. And so when you're trying to share code, that's having a good testing story around that with all of the deprecations, and there aren't enough polyfills to cover that whole range. How do you do that?
yeah, that's really cool. What features are you most excited about ES6, and how do you think that is kind of influencing how you write Ember apps?
So I like to focus on the testing story, right? So when you're dealing with all of these apps and I'm in a position where I triage a lot of the more complicated issues. The more friction you can remove from the test writing process and from debugging tests, the more release confidence you're going to have. Because engineers don't want to make mistakes and they don't want to leave bugs and they want to have great tests. The easier you can make that, the better it's going to be. So async await is a huge win for testing. When you think of all of the async test helpers like visit and click and fill in, and some others that are shipping with add-ons now, being able to write that code as if it's sync and having breakpoints that work, that is a huge win in terms of making things readable and making it more approachable to really kind of um, build the use case that you're looking to test accurately.
With regard to like making tests approachable, uh, like the generators and stuff, do you find yourself using those to build up the default harnesses, and does that help your engineers kind of onboard a little bit?
It's so they it's the first step, right? I mean, it's not useless, and over time, the default blueprint for these tests has become better. I think that what the biggest wins for us have been really helping everyone understand async test helpers, and then switching away from, I think, HTTP respond, which was very brittle and sensitive to like ordering, to Pretender, which has been a huge win for us. Um, Also, this idea of page objects, and I
Yeah.
talked about that at Wicked Good Ember.
Yes.
The idea of building an adapter that completely contains the complexity of interacting with the DOM, that's a huge win because it makes it more encouraging to write multiple test cases. Once you've sunk the work into building that, a page object that works, churning out new test cases is really trivial.
And that obscures a lot of the DOM references that you kind of have to have. Like that's like the main win, that you just kind of get away from having to know too much about the DOM. But I did say, I think you were using what, data auto ID as the way that you kind of like hook in.
Yeah.
Is that still kind of like how you're doing it? That's what you mentioned at Wicked Good. Is that still kind of like the best way to kind of work with these page objects?
So the concept of auto ID is still a good one, and by the concept I mean have something that allows you to write a good you know selector in your test that won't get changed as behavior changes, as style changes, something that's really dedicated to you know a, a handle for a test to find a button or an input. That idea is good. One downside of the way we implemented it um, was using a bunch of private APIs. It was sort of tapping into the binding itself. I know a lot of validation tooling does the same thing, just so that you don't have to be very explicit and saying, this is the field for first name and its binding is name and the label is name,
Yeah.
and it starts to get verbose. In retrospect, that might have been a better choice. You live, you learn, and that's been sort of a painful point for a lot of complex apps, including ours. The idea of having the discipline to kind of contribute back to the framework and not take the easy way out, which is to use these private APIs to kind of get the job done, and the test passes and everything's fine, and let's just move on.
Yeah. Skid container skid dot find blah blah blah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I want to write like a script that checks for the presence of underscores in pull requests.
Yeah, and if there's
shut it down, you know.
And if there's 2 underscores, you're just out. Like the program
done.
just seg faults immediately.
Yes, you're removed from team. That's what happens.
So you mentioned testing is very important to you. I mean, do you have a big concern about performance and things like that? Do you have you seen any benefits with Glimmer?
Yeah, Glimmer's a game changer for us, and that's because we, at least for the Ed platform, it's still a very tabular app. We're not able to, as of this date, we're not deploying 113 yet to production. But in the branch that we're working on and getting upgraded to 113, massive improvements in the smoothness of infinite scrolling. Transitions are more smooth. We're able to use SVG easily. That's not a Glimmer thing, but it's certainly an HTML bars thing. So a lot of big wins from the performance standpoint. And I think that performance is a tough thing to wrap your head around when dealing with UI, with JavaScript UI, because there's sort of the performance rumors, right? Like never write a nested each, right? Because that's just going to re-render all the time. But then you got to focus on the big wins, and the big wins really come with keeping pace with the framework. That's the way that you can keep your performance high. That's sort of the best improvement you can get per calorie. Just making sure you stick with public APIs, making sure you're ready to follow the happy path, because there's really no competing with something like Glimmer. There are not enough little pieces of low-hanging fruit to make up for something like that.
I really, really like the term like performance, like measured by calorie. That's so good.
Yes. Yep. That's what it's all about. You can chase it forever, but you got to focus on what matters.
So are you looking ahead with these changes and kind of planning for some of the things that are coming down the line, like the one-way binding and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially with new code that's written, we're sort of training people to abide by the Ember 2.0 idioms, even though their app might still be stuck on 1.9 or something. And so really de-emphasizing controllers, with the exception of query params. We still need them for that. Passing things in explicitly to components and not relying on views so much, and sort of having that controller state to work with. So I think those are the kinds of things you can do to stop accruing tech debt as you try to kind of fight back and get back on the happy path.
Since routable components haven't landed, do you see yourself pushing like that? I think the standard way now is to move all of your controller template into like a component that has the same name and just shunt it down, kind of temporarily kludging the routable component story.
I think that's one way of doing it, but there's still the idea of having this underlying controller context in, like, if you're shifting from views and controllers to components, the big change is explicitly passing information into whatever needs it, and there's no shim that's going to handle that for you. So I think like really having a better sense of this is the role of this component, this is the data it needs. It's a great pattern. It's great for encapsulation, and it's great for accidentally having shareable pieces of your app that other people can use. They just sort of fall out.
So when you're doing that, are you trying to like do things like keep services out of components so that you don't have any external dependencies? So it's something on the outside's responsibility to pass exactly what that thing needs into it.
Yeah, we do use services, and I think that there are some things that controllers do, things that where you do need to hold a little bit of state. Services make a lot more sense there, but we're definitely more conscious these days about entangling things that have a short life cycle with things that have a long life cycle.
Right.
That's where you run into trouble.
Switching gears just a little bit. So you have a tremendous number of apps, 15 apps, and I'm assuming they range in complexity, but I'm assuming they're pretty large. What does the deployment story look like for those kind of apps? Do you kind of run the gambit, or are you trying to standardize there as well? I know there's a lot of effort towards Ember CLI deploy. Are you guys kind of going that route, or?
So this is another area where we didn't have a good story, and so everyone did their own thing. We do have CD pipelines across the board. That's currently mandatory at Yahoo. You have to have CD. So that's good to have. That's a good starting point. What I'm working on building for all of these 15 apps is something that's sort of the other half of Ember CLI deploy, an asset serving layer that sort of has this multi-tenancy concept where you can have all of these different apps, different versions of the apps, GitHub hooks that will, allow you to view a pull request um, operating against a production API without, having to deploy it. You can get, your product owner to sign off, actually see how it's working before you actually pull the trigger. So that's exciting, and that we're doing in open source. That's a project called Banker, and I would love for someone to suggest a better name, but it handles all your assets. So Banker, but building a sort of universally friendly single page app asset serving layer, it gives us the opportunity to really define what that story looks like, get everyone on the same page, eventually get our React and Angular apps serving off the same thing, because we all have similar needs.
Right. That's an awesome response to deployments. So, Ember apps, they do great job on the front end, but there's the back end story as well. And typically I see with large apps, it always ends up being kind of an API team, and there's a split. How do you kind of bridge that divide and integrate with your back end services, both from a technical side and also from like a team perspective? Like, how do you communicate with various sections of your team?
So I think that whenever you're setting off on a big project, there's the fastest and easiest path to walk down is to just let everyone do what they're passionate about, and odds are, for most people, it's one or the other, API or UI or build the web services, and it kind of depends on what itch everyone wants to scratch. We've tried to encourage, the formation of cross-functional teams, because things end up you end up with a more cohesive result when you have the same person thinking through the whole problem end to end. If you're handling the UI, you're not going to build the API in such a way that you need to make 40 requests in order to load a page, and vice versa. If you're working on the API, you're going to be conscious of what data is expensive. Do I need to make 6 joins in order to get this piece of information that's not so critical so the UI can consume it? So I'd love to see more of that, and I think it's a problem that a lot of large tech companies struggle with. But right now, it's sort of we have teams that are focused on areas of the apps, but when you break it down to individual developers, they're still pretty focused.
That's awesome. Very cool.
So you already mentioned you had recently hired a bunch of Ember developers. What kind of skills are you looking for in your team?
So what I love to see in JavaScript developers is experience with another language. So if you have experience working with a typed language, you're going to write your code in a certain way that's not, it doesn't have a contract that's waffling between, returning an int versus returning a string versus returning an object. If you have experience writing with a functional language like Haskell or F# or Scala, you're going to probably be very well suited to writing, performant front-end code as well. So that's a big win to get that. Just it's really all about aptitude. I mean, this web UI is an area of computer science that reinvents itself every 2 years or so. So experience is less of a factor, right? There's no one that's been doing this for 6 or 8 years, because frankly, if you've been doing it for that long, it looked completely different. You were probably working with Dojo or something, or Sprout Core before in the pre-Ember days, and what you knew does not apply. So it's really about aptitude and about being able to think about things in different ways, and often another programming language helps see multiple viewpoints.
That's cool.
Cool.
How do you onboard and bring somebody up to speed when they're coming in from, say, another language? So you hire a Scala developer or an F#er. any of these other languages, if that's their primary way of thinking, how do you kind of get them ready for Ember work?
I mean, I don't think we've ever hired someone that has like zero JavaScript experience, and you have to start there. But the way to start is, I'm a strong proponent of just throwing people in and giving them a bunch of small bugs, and really not putting any time constraints on everything. Let them find their way around. Eventually they start to get it home, and you kind of build from there. It's also a great way for people to figure out, what they're passionate about. I mean, there are developers who love working with D3, and man, the world needs more of those. The world needs more people who are willing to learn how to do that properly. So, let them go in that direction. And if there are people who are performance oriented, throw them at Steph and let them chew on Ember CLI bugs all day. So, yeah, I think sort of letting people find their way, find what they're passionate about, and push them in that direction. That's going to yield the best result.
So we always see you around the community. I mean, you're at tons of conferences. You're all over the place, and we saw that you have a meetup called Modern Web UI, right?
Yeah. So Tracy and I started Modern Web UI with the goal of cross-pollinating between the framework communities. If you take a step back and you've been in the Ember world, it's tough to have an open mind and a unbiased perspective towards what's going on with React, what's going on with Angular 2. And this is natural, right? We invest a great deal of time in becoming experts with a particular thing, and then the more you can align with that viewpoint, the more you can do well, and the more valuable that skill set is. But if you take a step back and you start looking at what React does well and what Angular 2 is doing, that's an opportunity to look at a group of really smart people who are making design decisions based on today's constraints. They're not starting from Sprout Core. They're not, trying to just build a view library. This is a whole framework starting now. It's really interesting to see what they're doing and what lessons they've learned, and maybe to take some of that and make it part of Ember, or to open a pull request for Angular 2 and help them, use more of Broccoli, which they're using like crazy. So yeah, it's been really successful there, and we've been fortunate to have. I think we haven't had an Angular core team member. We've had Jim Sprock from React talk. We had, of course, Steph talk from the Ember core team. Jaffer Hussein from Netflix had a great talk at our last meetup about Falcor, which is turning REST APIs inside out completely, and just some amazing technology there. And it's just growing so much from meetup to meetup. It's been a great thing to be a part of.
It's cool. I also like the fact that you guys you put it all online. So I'm actually, even though I'm on the East Coast, I can still kind of follow along. That's pretty great. I like that there are playlists and stuff too. I just pop it on, crank it up to 1.5 speed, and good to go. So yeah, that's pretty great. So the idea here is cross-pollination. Kind of what do you think right now, just from your experience, what are the things that we can learn from these other communities? Maybe just a few. Obviously, there's probably a lot of ideas. What are the main things that you think we can pull in like right now?
So something that React does well. I think I'll answer that plucking one idea from these two major communities, one idea each. React has done a great job at producing an island of excellence, right? They didn't aim to solve the whole problem. They aimed to solve one thing, and that's syncing data with DOM. And man, they do a great job at that. And we've already borrowed the main idea, right? Having an idempotent rendering engine, and that's Glimmer.
Right.
But I think that the learning curve is great there because it's so simple and the scope is so small. I'm not sure if that jives well with Ember, because Ember is looking to do so much more than that. It's really trying to solve the front end app architecture problem. How do we stay organized? How do we find encapsulation where we need it? So what the Angular 2 team has done well, they have made their technology available to a group that spans a whole bunch of different camps. There are some people who are writing Angular 1 with ES5, and some that use Angular 1 and ES6, and some people that are using ES6 with Angular 2, and some people use TypeScript, and some people don't. And it's, I don't envy them at all for having to find solutions that work and keep everybody happy. But they've done it so far, and they seem to continue to retain a huge, huge group of people. I mean, the following is just massive.
Right.
So there's something to be learned there too. It sort of goes against the idea of an opinionated, this is the way you build your app with Ember CLI. But at the same time, you can't ignore the following of Angular.
So what do you think that other users looking at it at the Ember community, what do you think they can take away from us?
Right. So I think you mean other developers who are like new to JavaScript, or
But just an Angular developer or React developer who kind of gets to know a little bit of Ember. What do you think they can take away? What's one of the first the big wins they're going to have?
So I think the add-on ecosystem is a huge win. I don't think you see any of that in React or Angular yet. And that can only be as good as it is because a few opinions are worth it. Like taking on a few opinions and following the path that someone has laid out for you. Sometimes there is more benefit there than one realizes at the start, and going with the flow can pay off. That rubs some people the wrong way, and so there's an entire class of people that just they'll never write apps in Rails, they'll never use Ember. They want to be involved in all the little nuts and bolts, and more power to them. That we need a variety of different viewpoints to make sure we're not all adopting a bad idea and
Yeah,
it's just like bad stuff everywhere.
So, Mike, you maintain Ember CLI Materialize and now Ember Materialize Lite. Could you explain these two things? Originally, when I first started looking into them, they look like the same library, and obviously they're not the same thing. Could you explain a little bit about it? And I know there's two other libraries that you mentioned at the onset of our call. So there's some consolidation efforts as well. So maybe just talk about Ember CLI Materialize.
Right. So first I'm going to talk about Materialize and then Material Design Lite. So Materialize is it's a wildly successful project that a couple of Carnegie Mellon students that work for, or they go to school and are in the Human Computer Interaction Institute there. They did this as a project, I guess, and it's taken off. I mean, the GitHub repo has close to 10,000 stars, if not more. And the idea was to make it so you didn't have to buy into Angular or buy into Polymer in order to have material design in your site. And it's a great project. It works surprisingly well for being just built on jQuery and trying to remain as simple as possible. So I started to contribute to that project when a couple of our internal apps at Yahoo, we needed something that wasn't bootstrappy, and this seemed decent, and I added a bunch of components. And eventually the original maintainer, Stefan Glasser, decided to pass it off to me since I was sort of the more active person that was squashing the bugs and so on. So that's existed for a while, and I'm glad to see how popular it is, for sure. Material Design Lite, that came out, I believe, only a couple of weeks ago. It's a project that Google is behind, and it's a really well-written stab at taking on the same problem, right? I don't want Polymer, I don't want Angular, I still want to use Material Design. And so they're using only vanilla JavaScript. There's no jQuery.
Wow.
It's super lightweight, and it's targeted at static apps. So we have to jump through some hoops in order to make it work for a single page app of any kind. It's not too bad, not hacky by any means, but not incredibly straightforward either. So they're both wrappers around other projects that exist. The two other projects that I don't maintain directly are Ember Material Design, which is a conversion of Angular's material design stuff, and then Ember Paper, which is a pure ground up, let's build it the idiomatic Ember way approach to this. I've been trying hard to get some consolidation to happen here, but the problem is that 3 of them are closely aligned with something else that already exists. And as soon as we start to kind of fuzz that concept and to, take us off the materialized path and take us off the material design light path and start to converge, we lose the identity of these projects a little bit. So I would like to see Ember Paper turn into something that is as full-featured as these other 3 options. And in the meantime, I think we kind of have to exist in our current state and people sort of make their own decision.
Very cool. Very cool. Definitely something I'm going to look into. I really like I like all of the components that come out of Ember CLI Materialize. It seems like nice and modular. I have to mention this because he will get upset if I don't mention it. My pair is working on Ember CLI Materialize, and he wanted to say thank you for maintaining it.
You're welcome.
So, Mike, it's a longstanding tradition for us to let the guests of our show name the episode. Do you have a name for us?
Sure. Let's name this episode Componentize All the Things.
Yes, that's so good.
Totally.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, it's been really good having you on.
Thank you.
So that's all for this Ember Weekend. I'm Chase McCarthy.
I'm Jonathan Jackson.
Oh, I'm Mike North.
See you next weekend.